Tortured Souls. A Tale of the Assassin Without a Name by Scott Marlowe. I'm going to need you to repeat that. The vagrant scratched at his matted beard, his rheumy eyes darting between me and Rabbit. Like I told your friend here, I seen it with my own eyes. This fellow, he's walking down Cutter's Alley, minding his own business. Next thing I know, he's gone. Just like that. He snapped dirty fingers, the sound sharp in the frosty morning air. One step he's there, next step he ain't. I studied the old man's face, looking for signs of drink or devil's tongue. His pupils appeared normal, and his speech was clear enough. Gone how? Did he duck into a doorway? Fall through a grate? No, you ain't listening. The vagrant shook his head vigorously. He was walking, see? Right foot, left foot, right foot. That certainly sounds like walking, I said. Right. So, he's moving along, then nothing. Meaning? He vanished. He was there 1 second, then gone the next. Didn't cry out or nothing. That ain't all, Rabbit said, rubbing his hands together for warmth. I could have picked a more comfortable spot, something closer to a barrel fire and other warm bodies. But meetings like this one were meant to stay private. Tell him the rest. The vagrant licked dry lips. Waited around to see if I was seeing things. That's when this other fellow shows up. Big man, bald head covered in tattoos, strange markings, all geometric-like. He goes right to the spot where the first man disappeared, picks something up off the ground, then walks away safe and sound. I frowned. What did he pick up? Can't say. Something about yay big. He held his hands yay big apart. Maybe metal, the way it caught the moonlight. How long ago was this? The vagrant squinted, counting on his fingers. 3 nights ago, maybe 4. Time gets away from me sometimes. I tossed him a copper florin, which he bobbled but hung on to. You see anything like this again? You find Rabbit. He knows how to reach me. Bobbing his head, the old man shuffled away into the maze of alleyways that crisscrossed the shambles. I watched him go. What do you think? Rabbit asked. I think someone's been setting traps in alleys, and I think I know who. You did good bringing this to me. Rabbit cut through any pretenses and held his hand out, waiting for his payment. My coins disappeared into a pouch at his belt in no time. Rabbit grinned. Whatever it is you're thinking of doing, try not to get killed. With my hand on my heart, I said, I'm touched, Rabbit. I didn't think you gave a rat's arse about my well-being. Normally I don't, he said, but ever since Malachi keeled over, you've been coming to me more and more. Only a fool turns down easy money or doesn't look out for his business interests. And the priests of the luminance would have us believe money is the root of all evil, I mused. Don't worry about me, Rabbit. I can take care of myself. Spread the word. The Blood Witch may be gone, but we might have another, worse problem brewing. People should remain wary. Rabbit spat. What do you expect him to do? Not walk down the street because they might vanish into thin air? My stare was admonishment enough to make words unnecessary. Rabbit's shoulders sagged. I get your meaning. I'll do my part and let others know. What are you going to do? I have a client who wants her friend found, so I'll keep searching until I find him. Folk vanishing is the best lead I've had so far. I parted company with Rabbit as the first pale hints of dawn crept across the sky, making my way through the winding streets toward the Temple District. The geometric tattoos the vagrant had described belonged to only one group, and if the Jackery were involved in making people disappear from the shambles, I needed to know why. The abandoned temples provided excellent cover for surveillance. I chose a position among the ruins of what had once been a shrine to the god of merchants. From behind a fallen pillar, I had a clear view of the hole in the ground that served as the entrance to the Jackery lair. Snow hadn't stopped falling for some days, which helped mask my presence but made the long hours of watching even more miserable. For 3 nights, I observed their routine. Guards changed shifts with military precision at dawn, noon, dusk, and midnight. Priests emerged during daylight hours, their movements purposeful but unremarkable on what seemed legitimate errands. A few carried packs, but Most looked empty, nothing suspicious, and nothing that connected them to people disappearing in the shambles. I followed some of the departing priests at random, abandoning the chase when they wound up at a market or similarly innocuous place before returning to continue my observation of the comings and goings of others. By the second night, I wondered if I was wasting my time. The cold had settled into my bones despite my thick cloak and wool-lined gloves. My legs ached from crouching behind the same pile of rubble for hours on end, and the cold radiating from the stone permeated my bones. Maybe the vagrant had been mistaken about the tattoos. Maybe the priest he'd seen wasn't Jackery at all, but someone else entirely. But I knew those sorts of doubts only manifested because of the time I'd spent out here. I napped from time to time, and ate when I was hungry, whiling away the hours with increasingly bored thoughts and regret for ever telling Mira I would help her. Well, after midnight on the third night, when the temple district lay silent, a single cloaked figure emerged from the underground entrance. Another red herring, I thought. I followed him anyway, hoping to breathe some life into my stiffening limbs. Like the others, he carried a pack over his shoulder, and his tattooed features remained hidden beneath a hood. A hobbled gait marked his movement, slowing his progress. I followed at a distance, keeping to the shadows cast by crumbling walls and fallen masonry. Once he entered the city proper, the priest surprised me when he headed straight for the shambles, moving through the borough's twisted streets like a man who'd followed this route many times before. He knew which alleys to avoid, which shortcuts to take, and where the local peacekeeping gangs patrolled. This wasn't his first time prowling or limping these streets. The priest stopped at a narrow passage between two sagging tenements, their upper floors leaning toward each other like drunken lovers. Refuse cluttered the alley, and the stench of human waste mixed with rotting food made breathing through my nose unpleasant. It seemed the perfect place for someone to disappear without attracting attention. I ensconced myself in the shadows across the street, watching the priest remove and unwrap a bundle from his pack. The object he revealed had the telltale signs of technology melded with sorcery. Roughly the size of a small strongbox, yea big, I figured. Its surface was a patchwork of polished brass and blackened iron that caught the snow-darkened moonlight in dull gleams. Crystalline nodes jutted from its corners like frozen lightning, each one pulsing with a faint inner radiance that shifted from deep purple to a putrid green. Delicate lines covered every available surface of the device, though from this distance I couldn't make out their details. I watched as the priest manipulated dials and levers, handling the machine with the reverence of someone who understood its power and the caution of someone who feared it. His movements were precise, almost ritualistic, as if one wrong modification might unleash forces beyond his control. As he worked, pinpricks of light appeared across the metal, starting dim but spreading like an infection until the entire mechanism glowed with an icy fire that cast eerie shadows on the alley walls. After he made one final adjustment, the air above the device shimmered and bent, as if reality itself folded in on itself. Then the lights died all at once, plunging the mechanism into darkness as it settled into deceptive normalcy. Then he positioned the device on one side of the narrow passage where it would go unnoticed by anyone not looking for it. Retrieving his pack, the priest continued moving deeper into the shambles without a glance backward. I gave him a block's head start before I followed. This time, he didn't choose a lonely alley but a major thoroughfare where people working night shifts or out on other business might walk past. From a darkened doorway, the priest removed a second device identical to the first from his pack and set it up with the same practiced motions. By the way he angled the device, I figured the invisible trap materialized in the middle of the street, waiting for some poor soul to step in the wrong place. The priest retreated to his doorway, pulled out tobacco and leaf, and rolled himself a smoke. He settled in to wait, like a spider on its web. It seemed well past time for me to act, so I moved through the shadows, maintaining a casual gait as I approached him. The smell of cheap tobacco hit me first, then the muskiness of a man who needed to bathe more. The priest remained so focused on the street, watching for potential victims, while the lit end of his Raleigh glowed orange in the darkness like a beacon. that he was unaware of the danger until I pressed my knife to his throat. "Busy night?" I asked. The priest stiffened but didn't cry out. "You're going to tell me all about these traps of yours," I said, applying enough pressure to let him feel the knife's edge. "And you're going to tell me what's happening to the people who trigger them." He spat his rolly out from between his clenched teeth but remained silent. "Nothing to say?" I asked, yanking on his hood to reveal a face that was middle-aged and weathered, with the characteristic bald head and black and white geometric tattoos covering his scalp and temples that marked him as Jackery. A thin, graying beard framed a mouth set in a hard line, and his eyes were like gray stone, unyielding but intelligent. "I serve the Dark One," he said through gritted teeth, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "I fear no mortal blade. Kill me if you must, assassin. Others will continue the work. We must satisfy the Dark One's hunger." I removed the knife from his throat but kept it close and ready. "You know who I am?" "Good. Except you have me at a disadvantage. What's your name?" He stared at me with that steely gaze, weighing his options. His eyes darted back and forth, narrowing in on the trap. He chose that moment to make a play for it, fully prepared to become its next victim rather than give me his most basic information. I caught him before he'd taken 3 steps. "Not so fast," I growled, but the priest twisted in my grip with surprising strength for a man his age. His elbow caught me in the ribs, forcing me to loosen my hold. He spun around, producing a curved dagger from somewhere within his robes, the blade gleaming in the moonlight as he slashed at my face. I jerked backward, feeling the steel whisper past my cheek. The priest pressed his attack, driving forward with desperate fury. His bladework was crude but effective, each strike aimed at vital points with the expertise of someone who understood anatomy. I parried with my long knife, the clash of metal ringing through the empty street. He was stronger than he looked, and more skilled than I'd expected. This wasn't just an engineer who built mechanical devices. This was someone who knew how to fight, even if he lacked the refined techniques of a true warrior. But desperation only carried one so far. When he overextended on a particularly vicious thrust, I caught his wrist and twisted hard. The dagger clattered to the cobblestones as he cried out in pain. I drove my knee into his stomach, doubling him over, then brought my knife hilt down on the back of his head. The impact should have knocked him unconscious. Instead, something went wrong. Maybe I hit him harder than I intended, or his skull was thinner than most. The sickening crack that followed told me everything I needed to know. The priest crumpled to the street, unmoving. I knelt beside him, checking for signs of life that I already knew I wouldn't find. His gray, sightless eyes stared at the winter sky, and blood trickled from his nose where his face had struck the cobblestones. "Damn," I muttered, sitting back on my heels. Now I had no one who could explain how the devices worked. Approaching footsteps from a side alley interrupted my thoughts. Working quickly, I searched the priest's corpse with speed, born from familiarity, finding nothing but a few coins. No orders, no correspondence, nothing that might point me toward his superiors or reveal the scope of the operation. Now what? No more than a few seconds passed before I figured out my next move. I needed the device, deactivated, for analysis, so I approached it warily, not wanting to trigger it. Crouching before it, I wasn't even sure how to turn it off. A single red switch seemed the most promising option. With the sound of approaching footsteps growing louder by the second, I flipped it and hoped for the best. Lights flared but then dimmed and flickered out. Grabbing the priest's pack, I stuffed the machine inside, careful not to disturb any of the other dials or levers. Then I melted into the shadows, leaving the Jackery's body where it lay. Someone would discover him soon enough, but by then I'd be long gone. The pack was heavier than expected, but if the old priest could carry 2 of the devices about the city, I supposed I could handle one. Still, my shoulder was sore by the time I entered Chesterborough, where I finally stopped before one particular home. Though much of the house was dark, a light shone beside the door, and I spotted another within. After I knocked, heavy footsteps approached from inside. The door opened to reveal Raid Lendon in his work clothes. A recent project must have singed his beard, and his hands bore fresh burns from his tinkering. When he saw me standing on his doorstep, his expression shifted from annoyance to surprise to, finally, resignation. "Oh, shat," he grumbled, his stocky frame blocking the doorway. "What do you want this time?" I noticed he held a heavy wrench. "Raid, who is it?" Kess's voice drifted from deeper in the house, followed by the sound of something metallic clattering to the floor and a muttered curse. "It's our friendly neighborhood assassin," Raid shouted, not taking his eyes off me. Kess appeared behind her brother, wiping greasy hands on a leather apron. She had her hair pulled back in a practical braid, and soot streaked one cheek. Unlike her brother's hostile reception, she appeared more curious than annoyed. "It's the middle of the night. This better be important." "May I come in? This isn't a conversation for doorsteps, and this thing is rather heavy." Raid stepped aside with obvious reluctance. "Wipe your boots." The Lendons' home was surprisingly tidy compared to what lay deeper in the house. A few cloaks hung on pegs by the door, and a small table held an oil lamp that cast warm light across the polished wooden floors. The sense of metal polish and alchemical compounds drifted from their workshop somewhere in the back, mixed tonight with the acrid smell of something recently burned. A fire crackled in the hearth of a sitting room, visible through an archway to our left. "Well?" Raid demanded, leaning his wrench on his shoulder. "What's so urgent it couldn't wait until morning?" I settled the pack onto the floor. "I have something I'd like you to examine. Is there somewhere I can place it?" "That depends on what it is," Kess said. "A jackery trap," I said. "I'm afraid I can't get any more specific than that since I don't know any more about it." Kess frowned. "Not what I was expecting. Better set it up in the workshop. You agree, Raid?" "Aye," he said. Kess led us through the sitting room and down a narrow hallway lined with framed technical drawings. The deeper we went into the house, the stronger the sense of metal and machinery became. At the end of the hall, she opened a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron bands. "Mind the step down," she warned as we entered their workshop. The room beyond was a marvel of organized chaos. Walls were thick, reinforced stone, and gas lamps mounted on articulated arms cast pools of bright light across multiple workbenches. A clear delineation separated one side from the other. On the left, half-assembled crossbow mechanisms shared space with designs for siege engines, while metal plates bearing scorch marks suggested recent testing of explosive devices. Tools on this side were heavier, more robust, and designed for working with the thick metals and dense mechanisms required for weapons of war. On the right, precision ruled over power. Clockwork assemblies in various stages of completion lined the benches, each one like a mechanical flower waiting to bloom. Tiny gears no bigger than coins lay sorted in labeled compartments, while delicate springs coiled in perfect spirals. The tools were correspondingly fine. Jeweler's loops, micro-calipers, and brushes so thin they seemed made from single hairs. The center of the workshop served as neutral ground where the siblings collaborated. A workbench dominated the space, its surface scarred by years of shared projects. Tool racks lined every available wall space, holding everything from hammers that could reshape iron to tweezers designed for handling components smaller than the smallest seeds. Bins of raw materials occupied the corners. Ingots of various metals, coils of wire in different gauges, glass tubes filled with alchemical compounds that glowed with their own inner light. "Set it on the central bench," Kess instructed, clearing away several partially assembled mechanisms. "Raid, bring more light." Her brother wheeled over a standing lamp assembly, its multiple arms providing illumination from every angle. I removed the device from the pack and set it down on the scarred wooden surface. Right away, the workshop's bright lighting revealed details I hadn't noticed in the street's shadows. "Now this," Raid said, leaning in with obvious fascination, "is definitely not human work." Crossing my arms, I asked, "What makes you say that?" Kess examined the crystalline nodes with a jeweler's loupe, while Raid traced the brass and iron construction with practiced fingers. "The metallurgy, for one thing," Kess said, not looking up from her examination. "Brass and iron, sure, but craftsmen worked other metals into the alloy." Raid ran his thumb along the device's edge. The craftsmanship is crude in some places, sophisticated in others. Like someone took advanced mechanical knowledge and tried to build it using rougher techniques. He pointed to a series of joints where different components connected. See these welds? That's goblin work. No finesse, but strong as an ox. Goblin work? I leaned in. You can tell that just from the welds? Pfft, Raid said. Am I a dwarf or aren't I? Or might it have something to do with these markings? Kess asked, pointing to crude symbols etched into the metalwork. These aren't decorative, but they aren't exactly high-order runes either. Raid grunted. A Hauric sorcerer is responsible, is my guess. Hauric magic, Hauric engineering, Kess said, nodding. They're the only ones who combine this level of mechanical skill and magic with trap-making. What we have here is a portal generator, specifically a unidirectional transportational trap. Once activated, it creates and projects an invisible portal. The configuration of the levers and dials sets its destination. Invisible portal, eh? So, if someone were to go down a street where someone set one of these traps, they'd never see it? Kess nodded. They'd step right through and find themselves transported to the pre-configured destination. Goblins use devices like this for slave raids, Raid explained. Set up a portal, snatch people from the surface, transport them to the underland lickety-split, where no one can follow. So, why bring it here? What's your interest? People are disappearing, clearly because of this thing. The priest I killed set another one in an alley. Priest? Kess asked. Killed? Raid added at the same time. It was an accident, but yes, the device belonged to a priest. Jackery, actually. Fire and damnation, Raid said. The shat always follows you, doesn't it? Kess cleared her throat before I could answer. You're wondering where they're disappearing to, she said. I'm afraid there's no way of knowing for sure. Not without stepping through the trap's portal. It could go anywhere or nowhere. My guess is that it goes somewhere, I said. Before I accidentally killed the priest, he tried to jump through. Kess frowned in thought. Most of these types of traps can only transport so far, maybe the length of the city, but in a downward direction. Why down? I asked. 'Cause that's how goblins think, Raid said. For them, the world is up and down, not side to side like surface dwellers. They spend their lives underground, always moving further down or coming up to the surface to forage, raid, or cause mayhem. It's what they do. A transportational trap that took someone from one side of the city to the other makes as much sense to a goblin as trading gold for turnips. Not even they're that stupid. Any chance the Jackery re-engineered the traps? Raid shook his head. Hauric sorcerers program in the destination when they magic the trap. It's not easy or reliable to change it after the fact. Usually the destination is a dungeon. It's easier to keep captured slaves from escaping that way. But there aren't any goblin settlements around here, Kess said, pausing. Are there? A few months ago I would have said no. But now? Raid asked. You've heard of Chorus? A goblin lord named Rax rules over the deeper part of the ruins. His stronghold is called Grimlock. Kess looked like she wanted to spit. But why are goblins working with the Jackery? Raid grunted. The same reason goblins do anything, money. Whatever the reason, I said, they're sending people to Lord Rax's domain. The question is why. The Jackery don't take slaves. Then I remembered something. Wait a minute. The priest setting the traps said something about feeding the Dark One's hunger. I wonder what he meant. No telling without stepping through the portal, Raid said, swiveling from his stool to land on his feet. Too bad none of us are doing that, right? He looked at me, not quite glaring, but coming damn close to it. Right? Neither of you is, I said. But I think I will. Raid shook his head, exasperated. Here we go again. Ignoring that, I asked, can you activate the trap? Right here in our workshop? Raid asked. You can set it up outside if you like, but I figure it's warmer in here. Raid and Kess exchanged a glance. Still glowering, Raid finally let out a sigh. We can make room, Kess said. First, though, we should run some tests. We need to understand how long it maintains the portal, for one. Is 2 hours enough time to figure that out? I asked. More than enough. Good. I have something I need to do first. Update your will? Raid asked with a sour expression. Nothing so easy, I wanted to say, but I only smiled and left the Lendens to their work. 2.5 hours later, I found the Lendens hunched over the device, making final adjustments to a complex array of measuring instruments they'd arranged around it. Everything ready? I asked, not explaining where I'd been. Kess glanced up from a brass chronometer she'd positioned near the device. We've run 3 test activations. The portal stays open for exactly 43 minutes before it powers down and requires a reset. Should give you plenty of time to look around and get back. Assuming you don't get killed, Raid added cheerfully. I came prepared, so hopefully that won't happen, I said. I wore my complete assassin's regalia, with every weapon, conventional and not, I could fit somewhere on my person. Dark leather armor covered my torso, the studded vest reinforced with metal plates at vital points, while still allowing the freedom of movement my profession demanded. Metal bracers protected my forearms, and matching guards covered my shins beneath dark leather boots designed for silent movement. A hooded cloak completed the ensemble, its deep cowl capable of concealing my features in shadow. My long knives rested in their familiar positions at my belt, each 1.5 feet of curved, razor-sharp steel, with serrated back edges and bone hilts worn smooth by years of use. My Steel Island sword hung across my back, its black volcanic blade as sharp as ever. I had throwing knives and stars secured in easy reach across my chest, while a selection of lockpicks and other tools occupied hidden pockets throughout my gear. On my belt hung pouches containing various alchemical substances ready for use, such as flash powder and the like, along with a pair of negative energy grenades. A force glove adorned my left hand, its power crystal dim but ready to unleash repulsive energy when activated. Kess fiddled with the device's controls. We did some figuring, and by our estimation of the power requirements, the destination is roughly 800 feet below us and about 1/4 mile northeast. But once you step through, the journey will be instantaneous. Those distances are about right for a goblin lair, Raid said. Chances are you'll appear in a dungeon or cell. If it takes you to this grimlock, I hope you're prepared to get up close and personal with a whole lot of goblins. I found little comfort in the thought. Once I'm on the other side, how do I get back? You said before it was unidirectional, so I hope this isn't a one-way trip. Kess pointed to a dial on the device's face. The portal opens in one direction at a time, but it can work both ways. We just have to turn the dial to reverse the direction. You won't see the portal on the other side any more than you'll see it here, so make sure you pay attention to where you come out. When you're ready, step through and you'll reappear here. Sounds easy enough, I said, drawing a long knife. One blade and one free hand should do until I knew what I was up against. Ready when you are. While Kess started the activation sequence, Raid hooked his thumbs into his belt and asked, Ever been inside a goblin fortress? I shook my head. First time. Raid chuckled. You're in for an eye-opener then. Stay smart. You're too skinny and not ugly enough to fit in. They'll probably spot you a mile away. Thanks, I think, I said. But just 'cause they notice you doesn't mean they'll instantly want to kill you. Tone down the pleasantness and charm, act like you belong there, and you might survive your first few encounters. Goblins value ruthlessness, so act like a mean son of a bitch and you'll do fine, up until they realize why you're really there anyway. Then get ready for a fight. Why you doing this anyway? I shrugged. I want to know why the Jackery are taking people. That was reason enough. No point in adding Dex's name to the mix. Raid grunted, satisfied with the answer. You sure you don't want some help? My armor is always less than a skip and a hop away. I smiled at the thought of Raid hopping or skipping. Thanks, Raid, but I think it's best I do this one alone. I'll return before you know it. Activating now, Kess said, stepping away from the machine. The air to the side of the mechanism shimmered, then stabilized into a ring with distortions at its circumference, then nothing. Peering through the portal, I saw only the workshop on the other side. If I don't return during the first window, I'll try to make the second. If you don't make the second, Raid said, his tone growing somber. "We'll assume the worst." I lifted my mask, took a deep breath, and then paused. "Oh, if someone knocks on your door in an hour or two, make sure you answer it." Then I stepped through the portal. My skin prickled with phantom moisture while my breath caught in my throat as if I'd plunged into a freezing lake. The world around me stretched and compressed, colors bleeding into shapes that had no names, while sounds became textures I felt on all parts of my skin, even beneath my gambeson. For a heartbeat that lasted an eternity, I existed nowhere and everywhere at once, suspended between destinations in a void that pressed against my consciousness. Then reality snapped back into focus with jarring suddenness. I stumbled forward, my boots scraping against rough stone as my equilibrium fought to reassert itself. The portal's disorienting effects left me dizzy, forcing me to brace against the nearest wall until the world stopped spinning. The air here was thick and stale, carrying the accumulated stench of human misery. Unwashed bodies, fear sweat, and the metallic tang of old blood mixed with the musty smell of ancient stone and something else reminiscent of things long dead and improperly buried. Taking quick stock of my surroundings, I found myself in what was unmistakably a dungeon cell. Stone walls rose on 3 sides, slick with moisture and covered in a film of something I preferred not to identify. Iron bars formed the 4th wall, beyond which a narrow corridor stretched into darkness. I stood on packed earth and straw that had seen better days. Also, I was not alone. 3 other figures huddled in the shadows at the far end of the cell, all human from what I could see. They looked up at my sudden appearance with expressions of dull surprise, as if nothing shocked them anymore. One man clutched his arm at an odd angle, clearly broken. A woman sat with her back against the wall, gazing out into nothingness. The 3rd prisoner, a young man who was probably handsome if not for the bruising on his face, watched me with eyes that had seen too much. The sound of shuffling footsteps echoed from the corridor. A goblin guard strolled into view, carrying a wooden bucket and muttering complaints under his breath. He was an imp, small and wiry, with the characteristic white eyes and thin limbs of his breed. When he spotted me inside the cell, he dropped the bucket with a splash. "What the—" he started to say when my arm shot through the bars, caught him by the throat, and dragged him hard against the iron. His skull made a satisfying crack against the metal, and his struggling stopped before it began. "Make a sound and I'll snap your neck," I whispered, my face close enough I felt, and smelled his fetid breath. "Nod if you understand." The imp nodded, his white eyes wide with terror. "Good. Now where am I?" Grimlock," he stammered. "And these people?" I gestured toward the prisoners. "Why are they here?" "We take them from the city." "I already know that," I said. "Why do you take them?" "Because the priests want them." "Tattooed priests? Jackery?" More nods of affirmation. Behind me I felt a shift in the portal's energy, the Lendens reversing the direction I supposed. "Why here?" I asked the goblin. "What are you doing with the prisoners?" "Processing," the goblin said, as if that explained everything. "What does processing mean?" The imp swallowed. "We rough 'em up a little. Not too bad. Get 'em ready for the big show. We provide the terror, make 'em all scared and desperate. That's what the priests want." "What's the big show all about?" The goblin's expression became evasive. "More of what we give 'em here, but worse. Once we're done with the prisoners, we drop 'em off at the old amphitheater. We don't stick around much, but we hear the screaming. Lots of screaming. Then silence. You know, the kind of silence only the dead make." "Oh, I know all about that kind of silence," I said, yanking the goblin against the bars once more before I reached out with my other hand and broke his neck with a quick twist. I let his body drop to the corridor floor. I turned to find the trio of prisoners looking at me in shock. "Can you walk?" I asked, my voice muffled through my mask. "You stepped through a magic portal to get here. A Horror trap. I arrived the same way." "By choice?" the young man mumbled between swollen lips. They'd worked him over good. Once he stood, he helped the others to their feet. "If you can walk out of here, step in that direction. I pointed at the corner from which I'd emerged. It's the same portal that brought you here, but it will return you to Alchester. Don't be alarmed by the two dwarves on the other side. One is a bit grumpy, but they're friends and will help you get back home. They approached the corner with caution, feeling their way with their hands until they must have sensed the portal's energy. The man with the broken arm went first. The woman was right behind him. Before following, the young man turned to me and effected a bow that made him wince in pain from his injuries. "May I have the pleasure of knowing the name of the man who saved our lives, sir?" "No," I said, already turning away. "Then at least know that you have Joran Silversong's eternal gratitude." I recognized the minstrel's name, but before I could say anything, Joran took a step back and vanished. It only occurred to me now that I should have warned them about returning to rescue anyone else. One empty cell might go unnoticed. But the entire dungeon? That would raise alarms I wasn't prepared to deal with. I worked the cell door lock with the tools on my belt. My skills don't measure up to Elizabeth's in this sort of thing, but the mechanism was crude, designed more to keep desperate people in than skilled infiltrators out. In seconds, I had it opened, the stout iron creaking on its hinges as I dragged the goblin's corpse into the cell. With a heave, I tossed it through the portal, smiling as I imagined the look on Raid's face when the body landed in his workshop. With that done, I worked on getting the hell out of this dungeon. More cells containing the pitiful remnants of Lord Rax's collection efforts stretched in both directions. Iron-barred doorways revealed glimpses of human misery that made my stomach turn. In the first cell to my left, a middle-aged woman sat rocking back and forth, her simple homespun clothing torn and stained with blood. She muttered what sounded like prayers to gods who had long since stopped listening. Across from her, 3 men huddled in a corner, their faces bearing the distinctive bruising pattern of systematic beatings. Purple around the eyes, split lips, and the telltale finger-shaped marks on their throats where torturers had choked them to the edge of unconsciousness. Most of the prisoners were human, but Lord Rax's operation didn't discriminate based on race. 2 cells down, a Horik sat alone, his normally proud bearing reduced to a defeated slouch. Ritual scars covered his arms, suggesting he'd once held rank among his own kind before falling from favor. Whatever debts or betrayals had brought him here, he'd found himself processed alongside everyone else. In another cell, a pair of Skiva huddled together for warmth, their rat-like features twisted with fear. The larger of the two kept one protective arm around his companion, both flinching at every sound. Dried blood matted their fur, and bite marks scored their arms, possibly from some kind of fighting entertainment. The cell that stopped me cold contained a young girl, no more than 12, curled in a ball of straw and rags. She wasn't moving, and for a moment I thought she might be dead. But then her chest rose and fell. Whatever they'd done to break her spirit had worked. Her eyes held a hollow look of someone whose soul had given up. Quiet sobbing echoed from the shadows, punctuated by delirious muttering. Someone called out for water in a voice cracked from screaming, while another prisoner pleaded for mercy to captors who were long gone. One man repeated his children's names over and over, as if afraid he might forget them. The stench of unwashed bodies, human waste, and fear was overwhelming. Goblin torturers had systematically broken these people, crushing their spirits through calculated terror to serve whatever purpose the Jackery had in mind. Though every instinct screamed at me to start opening cells and lead a mass exodus through the portal, I forced myself to stick to the plan. My job was reconnaissance. The rescue would come, but not until later. As usual, I had planned for everything, including this. I navigated the dungeon passages until I found a stairway leading upward, where the echo of approaching footsteps made me press against the wall and melt into the shadows between 2 support pillars. 3 goblin guards descended the stairs, their conversation uttered in guttural tones that I struggled to understand. "Quota's behind again," I think one said. "Priests ain't happy about the shortfall." "Who gives a shat what the priests think?" another said. "We're giving 'em everyone we snatch as it is and not keeping a single slave for ourselves. You ask me, they should show more appreciation." Or at least, that's how I interpreted their words. Their voices faded as they moved deeper into the dungeon, probably heading on their rounds among the cells. I hoped they'd think the cell I'd emptied had always been like that, or that other guards had taken the prisoners for further processing. I waited until their footsteps disappeared before starting up the stone steps. Builders had carved the stairway from the same stone as the cells, each step worn smooth by centuries of foot traffic. My boots made no more than a whisper against the polished surface as I climbed, one hand trailing along the wall for balance in the dim light. The air grew less stale as I ascended, suggesting that ventilation was coming from whatever lay above. At the top, a heavy wooden door stood ajar, its iron hinges black with age but oiled enough to open with little sound. Through the gap, I caught glimpses of flickering torchlight and heard the distant sounds of a city in motion, voices calling, metal striking metal, the baying of some strange pack animal, and the rumble of wheels on stone. Taking a steadying breath, I eased the door open wide enough to slip through. Grimlock was unlike anything I'd ever seen. The cavern system stretched beyond the reach of torchlight in all directions, a vast underground cathedral whose ceiling disappeared into absolute darkness, hundreds of feet above. But this wasn't empty space carved from living rock, but an entire city that had grown like some impossible fungus in the depths of the earth. Spired towers rose from the cavern floor like stone trees, their architecture a fusion of elegant Korasi craftsmanship and crude goblin pragmatism. Unlike buildings constructed on flat ground, these structures embrace the natural contours of the cavern, wrapping around stone pillars and incorporating massive stalactites into their very foundations. The towers climbed to impossible heights, their peaks disappearing into the jagged shadows of the cavern ceiling where they merged with the living rock above. Builders had carved some towers from enormous stalagmites, their interiors hollowed out into spiraling chambers connected by winding stairs. Others rose as freestanding monuments of fitted stone, their surfaces adorned with both the geometric exactitude of ancient Korasi masons and the rough-hewn additions of generations of goblin inhabitants. Bridges of carved stone and wood arched between the towers, creating a three-dimensional web of walkways that defied every conventional understanding of urban planning. These weren't simple crossings but elaborate constructions in their own right. Some were wide enough for merchant carts. Others were narrow catwalks that swayed in the cavern's air currents. Below them, suspension bridges of rope and timber connected the lower levels, while above, narrow spans of metal and stone linked the highest reaches in patterns that followed some unconventional logic of engineering. Korasi architecture formed the foundation of the place, its flowing lines and precise measurements still visible beneath centuries of modification. Doorways framed by carved columns led to chambers whose walls bore the faded remnants of once colorful pictographs gone dull with time, and wondrous displays of the night sky. Elaborate fountains, now dry, revealed a civilization that valued beauty as much as knowledge. But centuries of goblin habitation had transformed this marvel into something distinct and new. Crude wooden additions jutted from elegant stone facades like parasitic growths, their rough planks and tar-sealed joints a stark contrast to the smooth perfection of the original construction. Ramshackle structures of salvaged metal and timber filled every available space between the original buildings, creating a maze of improvised architecture that climbed the cavern walls in defiance of gravity. Torches and braziers by the thousands painted the entire cavern in shifting amber and crimson. The light caught on polished stone and reflected from pools of standing water, creating an ever-changing tapestry of brightness and shadow that made the city seem alive. Smoke from countless fires rose in lazy columns toward vents hidden in the cavern's ceiling, while the scent of burning wood mingled with the aromas of cooking food, unwashed bodies, and the musty smell of ancient stone. The result was an atmosphere equal parts magnificent and menacing, a testament to both the heights civilization could reach and the depths to which it could fall. Grimlock was a city that had never seen sunlight, yet it endured as a place where beauty and brutality existed in perfect, terrifying harmony. The sheer scope of the sprawling subterranean city threatened to overwhelm me, but the longer I stood in place, the more attention I attracted. For now, the gazes of goblins passing by slid past me, but how long before they questioned what I was doing in their city? So, I got moving, picking a direction at random. The place was busy despite the late hour, with goblins of all breeds going about their nocturnal business. Harek merchants haggled over goods in cramped marketplaces, while imp workers scurried past carrying bundles and tools. Gaugath guards stood at key intersections, their sheer size making even the spacious Korasi corridors feel cramped. I didn't avoid the guards, but blended in with the crowd, moving in sync with them while appearing to have a purpose of my own. The Impen guard had mentioned an old amphitheater where the big show took place, but I had no idea where to find it. Grimlock was vast, a maze of interconnected chambers and passages that could take days, weeks even, to search. I needed information, and I needed it before someone challenged my presence here. I imagined information gathering here in Grimlock was about the same as anywhere else. Transactional in nature, most were willing to tell all they knew for the right price. It was only a question of finding the right person, or goblin in this case, willing to do the telling. I found myself in what passed for an alley between two towering structures, wondering where I might find such an informant, when I spotted a tavern sign creaking in the breeze created by the cavern's air currents. The painted image of a snarling goblin head promised strong drink and rough company. Light spilled from its windows, and the rumble of conversation from within spilled across the street. It seemed a perfect place to gather information, but entering as the lone human presented challenges. Even if the patrons didn't kill me outright, they might raise enough of an alarm to bring Rax's guards running. The last thing I needed was Lord Rax learning of my presence in his city. I wouldn't go in there if I were you. The voice from the shadows made me spin, one hand dropping to a knife hilt. A smallish, thin-framed goblin, a Greckle, the most cunning of goblin breeds, emerged from what I'd taken for a pile of refuse, his movements so fluid and natural that I realized he'd been watching me the entire time. Yellow eyes gleamed with intelligence, and despite his ragged appearance, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who knew how to navigate perilous situations. "You look like you can handle yourself," he continued, brushing dirt from his tattered jacket. "Even so, entering that tavern alone would be a very poor choice. However, were I to accompany you, you might survive." I studied his pockmarked face, searching for signs of deception. Greckles were notorious for their duplicity, but this one seemed an opportunistic sort. "I'm looking for information," I said. Fiendish eyes glared. "You want information? You'll find it in the Broken Fang. But ask the wrong questions to get it, and you might wind up dead." "But you can make sure I stay right side up?" The Greckle grinned, revealing sharp teeth. "You learned fast for a human." "All right then. What's your price?" 5 silvers guarantees you get through the door in one piece," he said without hesitation. "Another 5 gets you out." "How do I know you won't sell me out to the highest bidder the second we're inside?" The Greckle's grin grew wider. A clawed hand rested lightly on the hilt of a dagger at his waist. "If I wanted to rob or kill you, I would have already called in my boys. But I have a reputation to maintain. Skit knows how to keep his end of a deal. You're obviously not from around here, but ask anyone. They'll tell you Skit's an honest goblin. Besides, right now, you need what I'm selling." I considered my options. Time was running short, and I needed information. 3 Kalandorian silver up front, the rest when we're done. "Deal." Skit held out a small, grimy hand, which I filled with coins. "Follow my lead and lighten up. You look like you're planning to murder someone." We crossed the alley together, Skit's presence immediately transforming my status from dangerous intruder to curious visitor. The tavern's exterior was a sight of foulness, its stone walls blackened by centuries of soot and grime. Above the reinforced oak door, a painted wooden sign depicting a snarling goblin head wreathed in flames creaked on rusted chains. A woodworker had carved the name of the place, the Broken Fang, beneath the head in crude goblin letters. The building's windows glowed amber with firelight, their thick glass panes warped and stained with age. Through them, I caught glimpses of moving shadows and the occasional flash of steel as patrons gestured with their weapons while making points in heated discussions. The sound that leaked through the heavy walls was a constant rumble of conversation, punctuated by harsh laughter and the crash and clang of crockery. A steady stream of smoke poured from a chimney that looked like masons had effected repairs with whatever materials came to hand: bits of metal, chunks of stone, and what might have been pieces of armor welded together. The acrid smell of burning wood, mixed with the scent of roasting meat and something unidentified, made my nose wrinkle. Above it all drifted the unmistakable scent of strong alcohol and sweaty goblins packed too tightly together. As we approached the door, a loud crash erupted from within, followed by cheering and the sound of coins changing hands. Someone had either won big at whatever passed for entertainment here, or lost spectacularly. Skit pushed through the heavy oak door with the casual confidence of a regular, and I followed close behind. As soon as we crossed the threshold, the tavern's raucous atmosphere died like a snuffed candle. Conversations halted mid-sentence, dice stopped rattling, and even the crackling of the central fire pit seemed to quiet. Every goblin in the place, I estimated at least 40, turned to stare at us with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. The silence stretched for a heartbeat that felt like an eternity, during which I felt the weight of dozens of eyes cataloging my weapons, my stance, and my potential threat level. Hands drifted toward sword hilts and belt knives with practiced ease. On a whim, I lowered my mask, letting them see my face and the smirk that showed them I was anything but frightened. Skit raised a scrawny arm and called out, "Evening, you ugly bastards! Brought a friend who's buying the next round." Wait, what? I barely had time to speak before the tension broke like a dam bursting, and conversations and other activities resumed with renewed vigor. Even so, more than a few patrons stole glances at us as we made our way to the bar. The Broken Fang's interior was a testament to goblin sensibilities, meaning it valued function over form and intimidation over comfort. Massive wooden beams that looked like salvage from shipwrecks supported the ceiling, low and blackened with smoke, although I didn't know where they had found anything like that down here. Trophies hung from every available surface, skulls of various species and sizes, weapons with notched blades and broken hilts, pieces of armor bearing the scars of violent encounters. Someone had mounted a few heads with a suspicious freshness about them near the bar, their glassy eyes reflecting the firelight. Tables and chairs filled the main floor in haphazard arrangements, most bearing the scars of past altercations, including knife gouges, burn marks, and dark stains that could have been wine or blood. The furniture was an eclectic mix of stolen goods. An ornate chair that might have graced a nobleman's dining room sat next to a crude bench made from split logs, while a table that a carpenter had carved from an enormous tree stump dominated the room's center. The bar itself was a work of pragmatic art, constructed from a single slab of black stone, polished to a dull shine. Behind it, shelves lined with bottles, jugs, and clay vessels stretched to the smoke-stained ceiling. Some containers bore the work of skilled artisans, while others clearly improvised from whatever materials were available. Skit bounded ahead with the easy familiarity of a longtime patron, leaping onto a stool with practiced agility. I chose to lean against the bar, keeping my feet planted and my back to the wall, where I could watch the room's other occupants. The barkeep emerged from behind a curtained doorway, and I understood immediately why the tavern keeper commanded respect. He was a Harik built like a mountain, with shoulders broad enough to block doorways and arms capable of crushing skulls with casual effort. Ritual scars covered every visible inch of his hide, each one telling a story of violence survived and enemies defeated. When he smiled, gold teeth glinted among the yellowed originals. "Well, well," he rumbled in a voice like grinding millstones. "We don't get many humans down here." "He's with me, Brock," Skit said casually. "Paying customer. Looking for some information." The barkeep's expression shifted from suspicion to calculation. "Information costs extra. What'll you have?" "Whatever passes for ale down here," I said, not brave enough to test the wine. "Make it 2, Skit said. "In a clean mug, if you don't mind." Brock glared at Skit, but he turned to a keg behind him to fill 2 cups. I placed a silver dinar on the counter. "I assume Kalandorian silver is good here?" Brock snorted. Gold's gold and silver's silver, as long as it's pure. You go and try to pass off silver loaded with tin. I'll feed you to the pitworms myself." "His silver's good," Skit said. "Or it better be." Brock slid 2 mugs our way. Then he picked up the coin to examine it. He bit it to test its authenticity, then nodded with satisfaction. I swirled the liquid inside my mug, relieved that it at least had the appearance of ale, even if it smelled considerably worse. I took a quick drink, forced myself to swallow, then placed my mug on the counter along with another silver piece. "First one's for our drinks," I said, overpaying on purpose. "This one is for everyone else's since it seems I'm supposed to get the next round." I placed one more coin next to the other. "What's that one for?" Brock asked. "Information." Brock raised a hairy brow. "What kind of information?" "I've heard about the big show," I said. "I'd like to see it for myself." Several patrons at nearby tables turned our way with obvious interest. Brock reached into a bin of recently washed cups and started drying one on his apron. "If that's all, you can keep the last coin. Anyone can tell you how to get to the amphitheater. In fact, I'll tell you right now. Take the sunken road past the market quarter and follow it down to the second deep. Can't miss it. It's the only building down there that still has all its walls." "So the amphitheater is where all the excitement happens?" I asked, taking another reluctant sip of my ale. The liquid burned my throat like alchemical fire and went down like mud. Brack shrugged his massive shoulders. "Depends on what you mean by excitement. In the old days, when Chorus was still standing, people say it was a proper arena. My people even used it for a time. Now, it's where the surface dwellers do their business with the prisoners they bring down." "Surface dwellers?" I kept my tone casual, though my pulse quickened. "What kind of business?" "The screaming kind," called out a gravelly voice from a nearby table. I turned to see a one-eyed Horek nursing a clay jug, his remaining eye studying me with obvious amusement. Scars covered his arms in intricate patterns, and a collection of finger bones hung from his belt like grotesque jewelry. When he grinned, I noticed several missing teeth. "Vorth knows more about the surface dwellers than anyone," Brock said. "Worked security for them until he ran afoul of their leader." "Almost cost me my good eye," Vorth said, pointing to the one opposite his scarred socket. "But I learned plenty before they chased me off." He pointed to an empty chair at his table. "Buy me another drink, and I'll tell you what you want to know." I glanced at Skit, who nodded his approval. We moved to Vorth's table, a scarred wooden surface that had seen better days. The Harek's remaining eye tracked my every movement as I settled into the chair across from him. "What's your interest in the surface dweller's operation?" Vorth asked. "Looking to get in on the trade?" Brock delivered Vorth's drink, which he tipped in my direction before taking a generous swig. "I'm curious about the entertainment," I said. "Heard the show down there is unlike anything on the surface." Vorth laughed, a sound like grinding stone. "Entertainment. That's one way to put it." He took another long pull from his jug. "The surface dwellers have been running their operation for a few months. Started small, maybe 1 or 2 prisoners a week. Now they're processing 5, 6 every few days." Processing? I was getting tired of hearing that word. "Systematic terror," Vorth explained. "They don't want information or confessions. They want pure fear, desperation, the kind of anguish that breaks a person's spirit completely. The prisoners get softened up in the dungeons first, roughed up just enough to make them pliable. Then they get sent to the amphitheater for the main event." "Huh," I said, leaning back. "Seems like whoever is running things has it all planned out. Any idea who they are? You keep calling them surface dwellers. Maybe I know them." "Not unless you're the religious sort, and don't mind me if you are." "You saying they're priests?" I asked, feigning surprise. "That I am. The wickedest kind, too. The white-haired one, she disappeared for a while, but I hear she's back. Makes our hex blade look like a sprite. She's got a dark streak blacker than the third deep. Bitch threatened to take my good eye for letting a prisoner in the dungeon die, like I have any control over that. You humans break too easily." "White hair?" No doubt he meant Lyra, her vitality restored thanks to me, and once more advancing the Jackery's plans. But were those plans conceived in Onias's mind, or Shadowgrim's? Lyra served two masters, so which one benefited from this operation? I took a drink, advancing the conversation by casual measures, like two old friends chatting about the latest goings-on. It seems a strange arrangement between Grimlock and these priests. They call themselves Jackery, Vorth said, and it's strange indeed. Thanks go to Lord Rax for entangling us in this mess. Mess? I asked. I've heard about Rax. They say he's as quick with a blade as he is in a negotiation. I hadn't really heard that, but it fit the narrative. I'm sure the Jackery are compensating Grimlock for your efforts, are they not? If not in coin, then in some other way. Definitely not in coin, Skit said. Even I've heard the grumblings coming from the dungeon workers. No one's happy with the current arrangement, except maybe our fearless leader. Any idea what he gets out of it? I asked. The priests promised him something big once they finished their work. Couldn't say what, but Rax seemed satisfied with the arrangement. I drained more of my ale, fighting back a grimace. What about security? Lord Rax provides the muscle, Vorth said. 24 guards minimum at the amphitheater at all times. Harek warriors mostly, with a few Gaugaths for intimidation. What happens to the prisoners after they're processed? We dump them in the bone pits deep in the ruins. What's left to dump anyway? Meaning? Meaning there ain't much left of 'em. Vorth took a long drink, finishing his ale. I motioned to the bartender to bring him another. Not much other than dried-out husks. No idea what dark ritual the priest performed to make them that way, but I know what comes from it. Vorth leaned in. Capsules filled with dark energy. Capsules? I asked, genuinely bewildered. Filled with dark energy, Vorth repeated. Dozens of them. I saw them once, all arranged side by side in a box, ready for shipping to the surface. Huh, I said, adjusting my position in my very uncomfortable chair while Brock delivered Vorth's drink. What's your interest anyway? Vorth asked. I mean, it ain't any of my business, but you seem like someone who likes to shake things up. As if to demonstrate what he meant, Vorth's hand shot out, taking hold of Skit and giving the Greckle a vigorous shake. Hey, get off me! Skit cried out, slashing his claws across Vorth's hand. Vorth released the other goblin, but he neither roared in anger nor cried out in pain at the wound Skit had delivered, even though I spotted the lines of blood where Skit's wicked claws had exacted their toll. Instead, Vorth let out a booming chuckle that cut through the murmur of conversation hanging over the broken fang, and drew the notice of several goblins seated at adjacent tables. I'm only messing with you, Skit. All serious now, he said to me. Now, stranger, how about you tell me the real reason you're here? Otherwise, I might have to go see if Lord Rax is interested in asking you the same question. Believe me, he won't ask as nicely. I'm not sure what reaction Vorth expected, but I doubt he anticipated a smirk. What other reaction could I have to a classic shakedown? Something funny? He asked. Not at all, I said. Vorth's generosity seemed too generous from the instant he offered. But I needed answers, and he was willing to give them to me. But such generosity raised suspicion. Given the value of the intel the goblin had given me, even a second ale didn't even the score between us. Vorth, shaking me down, told me he was, above all other things, an opportunist. Seeing an opportunity to expand our arrangement, I leaned in, lowering my voice so Vorth and Skit had to draw closer to listen. You're right, Vorth. I'm the kind of guy who likes to shake things up. But I also solve problems. For example, you have an issue with how much your lord is compensating you for your participation in his arrangement with the Jackery. He ain't compensating me at all, Vorth said with a sour expression. Even more reason to hear me out. I'm listening. You too, Skit. You up for earning a lot more than what I'm already paying you? Skit's forked tongue slid across his lips, and he nodded. I haven't been completely honest with you. I already know about the Jackery. In fact, they're the reason I'm here. All true enough. Now, to sell the rest. My employer has a lot of questions about what the Jackery are doing down here. One of those capsules will go a long way toward answering those questions. I paused, letting that much sink in. I'm not here to make trouble for anyone but the priests. If you're willing, I can pay you generously for getting me inside the amphitheater. You know how jobs like this one go. If I had more time, I'd do it on my own. But sometimes a job requires an inside man. Or goblin. Two even, Skit said, grinning. Vorth appeared less enthusiastic. How much we talkin' here? Can't say any amount is enough to make me want to risk crossing paths with that white-haired bitch again. Don't worry, I said. I can handle her. Neither goblin appeared convinced. If you say so, Vorth said, downing the last of his ale. Now, about that price. I presented a figure that Vorth and Skit initially found offensive. They hemmed and hawed, scoffing as they threatened to walk away from the deal until I sweetened the pot enough to sit them back down. We discussed specifics, the best route to the amphitheater, whether to talk or bribe our way through the guard stations, and what to do if Lyra discovered we were there, all of which required adjustments to the final price until we finally came to an agreement. I'll pay a small retainer up front and the rest when the job is done. Skit flashed sharpened fangs at me. What happens if you don't make it? A fair question deserved a fair answer, so I said, if I don't make it, then you don't get paid. So best make sure I do. Now, gentlemen, if you'll finish your drinks, we have work to do. We left the Broken Fang through a rear exit that opened onto a service alley barely wide enough for the three of us to walk side by side. Vorth pulled up his hood, the rough fabric casting his scarred features into shadow, while Skit did the same with a tattered cloak that had seen better days. In the dim torchlight, they looked like any other goblins, except such goblins escorted the only human in the city. I did my part, drawing my own hood and concealing all but the slit of my eyes with my mask. A casual observer might think me nothing more than a slightly less thick Horik. Anyone who looked closer would see the weapons I carried and know better than to involve themselves in my business. First stop, Vorth said, leading us deeper into the maze of side passages that honeycomb this section of Grimlock. We need papers. We'll have to pass through several checkpoints. Some guards won't care, but the ones at the amphitheater will. We won't get far without the right orders. Rax keeping you all on a tight leash? I asked. Vorth grunted. Something like that. Too many goblins were sneaking down to gawk at the show, Skit said. The priest didn't like it. We wound through increasingly narrow passages until Vorth stopped at what looked like a dead end. He knocked on a section of wall with a specific pattern, 3 quick raps, pause, 2 more, pause, then a single knock. A hidden panel slid aside to reveal a Greckle even smaller than Skit, with dimmed yellow eyes that darted between us. Vorth, the Greckle said in a voice like rustling parchment. I told you I didn't want to see your ugly face for 2 weeks. It hasn't even been 2 days. The Greckle slammed the panel shut. Skit cackled. What'd you do to tick him off? Shut up, Vorth said, knocking again. He dispensed with the code this time and gave the secret door a hefty pounding. Open up, Scritch. The panel slid open. This better be good. What do you want? Duty papers. Official seal, proper wording, the full treatment. Scritch's beady stare lingered on me with obvious suspicion. This one's not goblin. He's with us, Vorth said, holding up a small pouch of coins. Will you do it or not? The sound of silver clinking overcame Scritch's reservations. The panel closed again, but this time we heard latches undone on the other side, and soon a fold in the wall creaked open. Scritch waved us inside. The forger's den was a cramped space, its walls lined with shelves holding bottles of ink, stacks of parchment, and an impressive collection of forged seals and stamps. A single oil lamp cast dancing shadows across work tables covered with documents at various stages of completion. The smell of ink, heated wax, and the acrid scent of alchemicals saturated the air. Standard patrol orders? Scritch asked, already moving to select the appropriate materials. Yes, but with amphitheater access, Vorth said. 3-person team, duration unspecified. Put something on there about conducting a security review. It'll give us more freedom to move around. Scritch began his work with practiced efficiency. He selected a piece of parchment that already bore the proper watermarks, then consulted a chart on the wall that showed various official letter formats. His thin fingers moved with surprising speed as he wrote, creating the flowing script that marked official Grimlock documentation. "Inspection Team Alpha 7, he muttered as he worked. "Reporting to Hexblade Liaison for Amphitheater Security Patrol and Review. Duration, until further notice." He paused to consult another chart. "Authorized by Lord Rax's seal, witnessed by—" His slitted gaze fell on Vorth. "Captain Kroom of the Third Watch. He's on the other side of the city for the next 3 weeks, so no one will check with him." The forger heated a blob of red wax over the lamp's flame, then pressed an ornate seal into the softened material. The result looked impressively official, complete with the proper ribbons and aging marks that would pass casual inspection. "2 silver extra for the rush job," Scritch said, holding up the finished document. Vorth paid without complaint, tucking the papers inside his pocket. "Pleasure doing business." Once we were back in Grimlock's main passages, I stopped the pair of goblins. "Good idea with the forged orders," I said. "But I don't look like one of your guards." Skit cackled. "You don't even look like a goblin." "Which is why we need something more," I said. "If anyone asks, I'm a shadow walker, here at the request of the Jackery to provide extra security." The Unifying Convergence neared, and since Onias wouldn't leave anything to chance, it made sense. Vorth and Skit shrugged their indifference, and we got moving again. The road descended through the heart of Grimlock in a series of switchbacks carved into the cavern floor. Ancient Karasi stonework formed the foundation, but generations of goblin traffic had worn the surface smooth as glass in places. Vendor stalls lined both sides of the thoroughfare, their crude wooden frames a stark contrast to the elegant archways that supported the upper levels of the city. Merchants hawked everything from salvaged weapons to questionable cuts of meat, their voices creating a constant din that echoed off the cavern walls. We passed the first guard checkpoint without incident. 2 bored-looking Harik warriors leaned against their spears, more interested in a dice game than the steady stream of traffic flowing past them. The guards barely acknowledged Vorth's casual nod. "Market quarter," Skit whispered as we entered a vast circular chamber where the ceiling opened into a natural dome. Here, the original Karasi architecture was most evident in the sweeping curves of the walls and the uniformity of the support columns. Goblin additions had filled every available space, with ramshackle stalls and workshops, creating a maze of commerce that operated by its own chaotic logic. The second checkpoint proved more challenging. A Gaugath sergeant blocked our path, his massive frame wrapped in studded leather armor that its maker had crafted from multiple smaller suits. He held a club the size of a small tree trunk, and when he spoke, his voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Papers!" he demanded, his gaze falling on me when he said it. Vorth stepped forward with practiced ease. "Patrol detail, Sergeant. Lord Rax's orders." The parchment's official seals and ribbons caught the torchlight as he handed the forged document over. The Gaugath examined the papers with the cursory attention of someone who couldn't actually read, but who knew an official document when he saw one. After a stretch of time, longer than I would have liked, the guard handed them back and waved us through. Once out of earshot, Vorth leaned in. "Scritch's work passes every inspection, worth every copper we paid him." The road continued its descent, leaving the market quarter behind as we entered what Vorth called the Second Deep. Here, the cavern narrowed, and the walls bore the tool marks of Karasi masons, precise chisel strokes that had transformed rough stone into smooth passages. Fewer torches lit this level, leaving ample amounts of shadow between the scattered points of light. "There," Vorth said, pointing ahead to where the passage opened into another vast chamber. The amphitheater dominated the cavern's space, its presence so commanding that everything else in its vastness seemed diminished by comparison. As we drew closer, the true scale of the structure became apparent. The outer wall rose 100 feet into the cavern's gloom, its stones fitted together with the mathematical precision that had made Karasi architecture legendary throughout the known world. Unlike the rest of Grimlock's hybrid construction, this monument had survived the centuries virtually intact, preserved by the same craftsmanship that had built it to outlast empires. The stonework was a marvel of both engineering and artistry. Masons had cut each block from a different type of stone, creating subtle variations in color and texture that formed deliberate patterns across the amphitheater's circumference. Pale limestone alternated with blocks of darker granite, while veins of marble created flowing lines that drew the eye upward toward the structure's crown. Master craftsmen had adorned the amphitheater's outer face with an elaborate frieze that spiraled around the entire building in ascending tiers, the reliefs carved with such skill that the figures seemed ready to step from the stone itself. Gladiators locked in mortal combat dominated the lower sections, their muscles straining as they wielded weapons with desperate skill. Higher up, the carvings depicted the pageantry that had once surrounded these blood sports, rulers giving thumbs up or down, crowds erupting in cheers, victorious fighters receiving laurel crowns from beautiful maidens. But time and the grim purpose the structure now served had left their mark. Dark stains streaked down from the upper tiers, creating abstract patterns that suggested centuries of accumulated filth. In several places, the addition of crude goblin additions defaced or modified the original carvings. Karasi gladiators bore painted scars and missing limbs, while goblin folk, over time, had chiseled leering goblin faces alongside the noble visages of ancient spectators. The most disturbing modifications were the newest ones. Fresh chisel marks revealed where enterprising artists had altered sections of the frieze to depict scenes that had never been part of the original design. Figures writhed in agony rather than heroic combat, while hooded executioners replaced the referees who had once ensured fair play. These additions lacked the artistic skill of the original work, their crude effectiveness making them all the more unsettling. Enormous archways punctuated the amphitheater's outer wall at regular intervals, each one tall enough to accommodate the largest Golgoth and wide enough for supply wagons to pass through. Ornate bronze gates, whose green patina still showed traces of the intricate scrollwork that had decorated them, had once adorned the entrances. Now the gates hung askew on corroded hinges, their beauty corrupted by goblin modifications that included spikes, barbed wire, and what looked suspiciously like human skulls mounted as warnings. Above the archways, empty niches marked where statues of gods and heroes had once stood. Goblins had long since removed or destroyed most of the original occupants. However, a few fragments remained. A marble hand still gripping a bronze sword, the torso of some forgotten deity whose face vandals had chiseled away, the flowing robes of a figure lost to time. These remnants created an eerie gallery of the incomplete and forgotten. The amphitheater's upper reaches disappeared into the cavern's darkness, but glimpses of the highest tiers suggested that the structure rose even higher than its exterior walls. Lights flickered in windows that shouldn't exist, while shadows moved across balconies that seemed to float in midair. The building's interior was clearly more complex than its classical exterior suggested, modified by centuries of goblin occupation to serve purposes the original architects never intended. Guards patrolled the perimeter in pairs, their routes overlapping to ensure no blind spots. Most were Horek warriors, but I spotted several Golgoths among them, their size making them unmistakable even at a distance. All carried weapons and moved with the discipline of professional soldiers rather than the casual brutality of typical goblin enforcers. "How do we get inside?" I asked. "Main entrance," Vorth said, leading us toward one of the archways. "We're here on official business, right?" Two Horek warriors straightened as we approached, their weapons shifting to more casual positions when Vorth pulled back his hood. "Didn't expect to see you so soon," one of the guards said to him. "Lord Rax's orders," Vorth replied, holding out our forged papers. "Roaming security patrol." The guard examined the documentation with the perfunctory attention of someone who had seen similar orders before. His gaze lingered on me, taking in my dark armor and weapons with obvious interest. "Three-person team seems excessive, doesn't it?" Vorth nodded. "That's what I said, but the surface dwellers started complaining again about security concerns," I said, interrupting. "I work for the Jackery. They have concerns." "Concerns about what?" the other guard asked, annoyed. "That you have holes in your perimeter. The Jackery have enemies who would like nothing more than to shut this entire operation down." A lie, since the warders had told me they wanted the Jackery to succeed. "I'm here to seal those holes and make sure everything proceeds on schedule. The convergence approaches, and nothing must stop the return of the Jackery's dark god. The guards scrutinized me for a long moment. Then the one returned the documentation to Vorth. "Knock yourselves out." The entrance tunnel was wide enough for supply wagons, its walls lined with the same precisely fitted stonework that characterized the exterior. Torches in bronze sconces provided steady illumination, their flames revealing details invisible from outside. The walls displayed carved inscriptions in the flowing script of Old Chorus, proclamations of imperial glory, and names of champion gladiators immortalized in stone. "This way," Vorth said, leading us along a corridor that curved with the amphitheater's circular design. "We can drop the pretense for now, I think. I know a place where you can see what the big show is all about." Vorth led us to a stone staircase leading upward. At the top of the stairs, we came out onto an observation platform that jutted out from the amphitheater's inner wall. Not wanting to draw attention to ourselves, we crouched low and crept forward until we had a clear view of the arena floor below. What I saw made my blood run cold. The Jackery, in conjunction with Rax's personnel, had transformed the arena into a place that defied every principle of mercy or humanity. 6 metal tables dominated the center of the space, each one a masterwork of blackened steel and brass. Heavy leather straps reinforced with metal studs secured arms, legs, torso, and head with ruthless efficiency. Complex machinery surrounded each table, and elaborate arrays of tubing connected each table to banks of crystalline containers, clear crystal vessels the size of wine bottles, arranged along the arena's walls in towering racks that stretched 20 feet into the air. Some were empty, but a darkness that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it filled others. Jackery technicians monitored and controlled the machines from a raised platform, where they manipulated a bewildering array of controls. But it was the prisoners who drew my horrified attention. 4 of the tables held victims, each one secured with leather straps that bit deep into flesh already raw from struggling. The victims' faces were masks of terror and agony, their mouths stretched wide in screams and moans that echoed off the amphitheater's ancient stones. Torturers had clearly written the cause of their pain in the form of bleeding wounds, crushed fingers and toes, and signs of the lash across abdomens and backs. The priests monitoring the suffering glanced over their prisoners with clinical detachment, more concerned with their machines' readings than alleviating the suffering of their captives. But that suffering seemed the point, for now the torturers had withdrawn to let the prisoners stew in their agony. Or maybe it was to allow the domed apparatus hovering above each victim's head to work its diablerie. Though each dome did not touch the victim, the tubing stretching to the banks of containment vessels. The capsules Vorth had mentioned, I presumed, pulsed with the transfer of dark energy from each person. Vorth and Skit grew bored and withdrew. I remained, watching as the goblin torturers returned to the arena. They carried implements designed for maximum psychological impact. Barbed whips that left distinctive scars, heated brands that sizzled against flesh, and curved blades that inflicted painful cuts without killing their victims. As they moved from table to table, they accentuated physical pain with emotional torment. "Your children are dead," one torturer shouted at a woman strapped to the first table, his voice carrying clearly in the amphitheater's acoustics. "Killed while calling for a mother who wasn't there to save them." The woman's anguish was immediate and profound, her screams taking on a different quality as despair overwhelmed physical pain. The closest machinery responded instantly, humming to life as monitoring priests nodded their approval. "No one will remember you," another torturer growled at his victim. "Your life meant nothing. You accomplished nothing. You will die forgotten, and the world is unchanged by your passing." Though goblins spoke the words, I knew someone else had written them. Like some dark playwright, Jackery priests had chosen the exact words to bring each victim to the brink. This wasn't simple murder. This was the complete breakdown of the human spirit under the weight of absolute despair. I watched with horrified fascination as the process continued. Mercy, or even a clean death, remained foreign concepts here. No one died with efficiency. Instead, the Jackery and their goblin henchmen maintained each victim at the precise threshold between life and death, their agony prolonged for days or longer, all intended to fill the vast array of capsules remaining empty. But what were they filling them with? One victim gasped and convulsed, the life soon to leave him, it seemed. In response, a priest shouted at the torturers, "You with the lash, and you with the hammer! We need every last drop of pain!" The goblins, cruel by any measure but doubly so for what they did next, descended on the near-dead person and went to work, lashing and hammering, cutting and pummeling, until the poor man's soul must have fled from sheer terror and mistreatment. As I watched the rate of effluent, or whatever pulsed through those pipes, increase, I also witnessed the victim's corpse dry out, shriveling and shrinking, until all that remained on the table was a desiccated husk that looked like someone had buried it in desert sand for decades. Only then did the pulsing energy flowing through the tubes stop. "Table 3 complete," the same priest who mustered the torturers announced. "Yield 14 full capsules. Transport to storage." Goblin workers wheeled a cart over to collect the husk. They handled it without ceremony, dumping the remains into their vehicle like garbage. The body was so light it barely made a sound when it hit the cart's wooden bottom. "Prepare Table 3 for the next subject," the priest continued, already focused on the logistics of maintaining production. The workers cleaned the table with brutal efficiency, scrubbing away the accumulated stains and replacing the tubing with fresh equipment. Within minutes, the station was ready for its next victim. That's when I spotted movement in the amphitheater's upper tiers. 2 figures stood in what had once been the royal viewing box, their elevated position giving them a commanding view of the entire operation. Even at this distance, I recognized them both. Rax, Lord of Grimlock, cut an imposing figure in his armor. As always, his stance radiated the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. Beside him stood Lyra, looking every inch the high priestess she'd been before her encounter with the amulet of eternal gloom. The potion had restored her vitality completely, returning her to the striking woman who had once commanded armies of the faithful. Her platinum hair caught the light like spun silver, and her bearing conveyed regained strength and renewed confidence. I needed to get closer. Whatever conversation took place between those two was worth the risk of getting caught. I worked my way through the observation platform's shadows until I rejoined Vorth and Skit, who both crouched behind a section of collapsed masonry. "I need to reach the royal viewing box," I whispered, pointing toward the elevated structure where Rax and Lyra engaged in a heated discussion. Skit's yellow eyes went wide. "Are you mad? That's Lord Rax up there." So, they'd already spotted him. "Which is why I need to hear what he's saying," I said. Vorth shook his head vigorously. "Count me out. Our papers say we're doing a security review, not conducting espionage on the boss." I studied the viewing box's structure, eyeing the narrow service passages that honeycombed the amphitheater's upper levels. Karasi architects had built maintenance access throughout the structure, allowing workers to service the complex mechanisms that had once provided elaborate entertainment for the crowds. Some of those passages might remain intact, hidden behind the decorative facades that casual observers never noticed. "What about the old service tunnels?" I asked. "Maintenance workers have access to the royal section without going through the main entrances, right?" Vorth followed my gaze, then nodded reluctantly. "Aye, there are passages. But if someone catches us in there without proper authorization—" "No one's going to catch you," I said, "because you're not going. I am." "Alone?" Skit's forked tongue darted across his lips nervously. "Those passages are a maze. You'll get lost, or worse, trigger some Karasi defensive mechanism that turns you into paste." "I'll manage. Now, tell me how to access them." The 2 goblins exchanged a look, speaking of shared reluctance and growing resignation. Finally, Vorth sighed. "There's a maintenance entrance 3 levels down from here," he said, "hidden behind a false wall panel that looks like decorative stonework. You'll need to feel around for the pressure point that releases the catch. And then? Then you follow the tunnel system upward," Skit continued. "But here's the problem. The passages branch and split like a spiderweb. Take a wrong turn and you'll end up in the amphitheater's bowels, or a dead end, or in a section that's collapsed entirely. In the end, They put their goblin minds together and came up with the simplest way possible for me to get there. So easy. Not even a human could get lost, Skit cackled. One more thing, Vorth said as I prepared to leave. No one's maintained the service tunnels in decades. Watch for loose stones, rotten support beams, and sections where the floor might give way. The Korasi built for eternity, but even their work has limits. And if we don't see your pasty white arse in 2 hours, Skit added, we're leaving without you. Payment be damned. No offense, but we're not dying for your curiosity. I left them to their nervous vigil and made my way down through the amphitheater's tiered seating. The structure's layout worked in my favor, providing numerous alcoves and shadowed recesses where I paused and checked for patrols. Most of the guards focused their attention on the arena floor and the main entrances, leaving the upper sections unwatched. With renewed screams echoing from the arena floor, it was a relief when I ran my fingers along the carved edges of a decorative relief panel depicting Korasi gladiators, which, when manipulated, revealed a narrow passage beyond. The service tunnel was barely wide enough for my shoulders, its walls lined with the same fitted stonework that characterized the rest of the amphitheater. Occasional oil lamps in bronze brackets provided dim illumination, their flames flickering in the drafts that circulated through the hidden passages. The air smelled of old stone and something indescribable that hinted at decades without proper ventilation. I followed the tunnel as it curved upward, staying alert for the branching passages that Skit had warned me about. The first junction appeared after perhaps 50 yards, where the main tunnel split in 3 directions. I took the left passage and continued climbing. The tunnel grew narrower as it ascended, forcing me to duck in places where the ceiling had settled or where support beams intruded into the walkway. Twice I encountered sections where loose stones had fallen from the walls, creating minor obstacles I had to navigate around. The passage eventually leveled out, and after another 50 yards, I arrived at a junction where brass plates mounted on the walls bore illegible Korasi script. But one passage was wider than the others, and showed signs of more recent use, with cleaner walls and brighter oil lamps. This tunnel led to a set of stone steps that climbed upward. At the top, I faced an ornate bronze door whose surface bore the royal seal of Chorus. A small viewing slot at eye level allowed me to peer through into the chamber beyond. The private rooms attached to the royal viewing box were more luxurious than anything else I'd seen in Grimlock. Korasi artisans had decorated the walls with intricate mosaics depicting scenes of imperial triumph, while thick carpets, dusty and tattered now, covered floors of polished marble. Goblins or other scavengers had removed anything useful ages ago, leaving the chamber empty. I tested the door and found it unlocked, its bronze handle turning smoothly despite its age. Slipping inside, I noted the curtained archway that led to the viewing platform beyond. Through the heavy fabric, I heard voices engaged in a heated discussion. I positioned myself near the archway, where I overheard the conversation without anyone seeing me. The arrangement was for 50 capsules per week, Lyra was saying, her tone sharp with disapproval. You've delivered 37. Lord Rax's response rumbled with irritation. My torturers work as fast as they can without killing the subjects too quickly. You want quantity or quality? I want both, Lyra said coldly. The convergence approaches and we cannot afford delays. Perhaps you need additional motivation to meet your obligations. Motivation? Rax's voice took on a dangerous edge. I've honored our agreement completely. My people provide the facilities, the labor, the security, all while keeping this operation hidden from prying eyes. What more do you want? Peering around the masonry of the arch, I saw Lyra standing rigid, every inch the commanding high priestess as her stare swept over the arena. Her restored vitality was evident in her posture and the authority that radiated from her presence. Rax loomed beside her, his shoulders quivering with anger he didn't bother concealing. What I want, Lyra said, is for you to understand that failure is not acceptable. We must satisfy the Dark One's hunger, and these delays threaten everything we've worked toward. The Dark One can wait another few days, Rax growled. Unless you've forgotten, this is my domain, my rules. Lyra turned to face him. Your domain exists at our sufferance, Goblin. Do not mistake our partnership for equality. The tension between them crackled in the air like lightning before a storm. I realized this wasn't just a business disagreement, but a fundamental clash of authority. Rax had grown too comfortable with his position, and Lyra had returned to reclaim control of the operation and get him back on track. "I need more raw material," Lyra continued, her voice dropping to a more conversational tone that somehow sounded more threatening than her earlier coldness. "The surface raids must increase, double the frequency." "Double?" Rax shook his head. "That will draw attention. The surface dwellers will notice if too many people disappear too quickly. Some are probably already noticing." "Then be more selective. Target the outcasts, the forgotten, the ones no one will miss. But I want 60 capsules by week's end, or this partnership ends." Rax fell silent, his scarred features unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a resigned acceptance. "Fine. 60 capsules. But I want additional compensation for the increased risk." "You'll have it," Lyra said dismissively. "Now, I want to observe the current session. Ensure your people understand the importance of maximizing each subject's output." I heard the heavy footsteps of his departure, the sound of armor clanking as he stormed away from the viewing platform. His boots echoed through the royal box's antechamber, growing fainter with every passing second. When he was good and gone, I stepped out of the shadows. "Hello, Lyra." To her credit, she didn't jump or cry out. Her hand darted toward a concealed weapon, but she stopped when she recognized me. "You look like your old self again," I observed, studying her restored features. "The potion of dark rejuvenation was most effective," she said with a slight nod. "Though you sacrificed members of the Jackery to get it to me, I still thank you for what you did." A moan from below cut between us, reminding me why I was here. "What the hell are the Jackery doing here, Lyra?" I asked, gesturing toward the horrific scene playing out in the arena. "This isn't about freeing your dark god. This is systematic torture and murder." Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her icy blue eyes. "Despite your meeting with the Whispering Shade, you understand so little. This operation serves a greater purpose than you realize." I figured she knew about my meeting with Shadowgrim. "Enlighten me." Lyra moved closer to the alcove's edge, where she observed the ongoing extraction process while we talked. "We call them tortured souls. Their energy is unlike any other. More potent, more powerful. Onias believes we harvest them so that the Dark One can bring about eternal darkness across the land. But Onias is mistaken." I waited for her to explain. The dream of eternal night has always been his obsession, not the Dark One's. Shadowgrim cares nothing for grand visions of darkness covering the world. I frowned. "Then why does he need the tortured souls?" "The reason is twofold," Lyra said. "First, he needs their energy to destroy the Malafang horn. Onias intends to use the horn to subjugate Shadowgrim once he is free. Once, Onias shared Shadowgrim's vision of destroying the horn, but then he realized the artifact's true power, that it could bend Shadowgrim to his will. The prospect of commanding a shadow dragon proved far more appealing than simply freeing one. Shadowgrim told me as much. Onias will use the horn to force Shadowgrim to bring about eternal night." "Yes, which is why he told Onias he needed the tortured souls to bring about eternal night. Onias will go to any lengths to see his vision fulfilled. The death of innocence is nothing to him." "That's the first reason," I said. "What's the second?" "A more rudimentary one. In the time Shadowgrim has been a prisoner, he has grown weak. When he emerges into the world, he will need sustenance. The tortured souls will rejuvenate him in ways few other things can. In part, the expanded scope of this operation is your fault." "How's that? Did you ever wonder why I wanted the Amulet of Eternal Gloom from Finrad's treasure room? The amulet contains a vast quantity of tortured soul energy. I plan to use that energy to bolster our reserves. I knew you gave it to Lord Rax as a prize, but imagine my surprise when he told me someone had recently stolen it from him. With the Unifying Convergence approaching, I have no more time to spend hunting treasures." That seemed a series of unfortunate events in which I couldn't deny my involvement. Since it served no purpose to discuss it further, I changed the subject. "You've served Shadowgrim from the start. I serve the true voice of darkness, not the deluded ambitions of a high priest who thinks he can chain gods to his will. Lyra's eyes found mine. You think it is Onias who has spared your life all this time, but the directive came from Shadowgrim, who saw long ago the role you are destined to play in his return to the world. Know this: if Onias succeeds in controlling Shadowgrim with the horn, eternal darkness is the least of your concerns. A dragon enslaved becomes a weapon of infinite destruction. Below us, another victim's screams echoed through the chamber as the extraction process reached its climax. The sound punctuated Lyra's words with terrible finality. What if someone stole the horn from Onias before? If it were that simple, I would have done it already. Onias discovered the horn long ago. When he realized its true value, he hid it away in a place so secret that not even Shadowgrim knows where it is. That doesn't mean it's beyond reach. But her mind was made up on the subject, and so she said nothing else. I watched as the horrid machinery filled another set of capsules with the dark essence of human suffering. How many more souls does Shadowgrim need? I will have all that is needed by week's end if Rax fulfills his end of our deal. Another 23 more. The energy required to rejuvenate a dragon and destroy an artifact as powerful as the Malafang horn is considerable, but we're close to achieving the necessary threshold. 23 more innocent people tortured to death. The number seemed both impossibly large and horrifyingly small. I thought of Dex, wondering if he had run afoul of this operation, his life and that of the others reduced to fuel for a dragon's revenge. There must be another way, I said. Lyra's expression softened not at all. There is not. Would you prefer to see eternal darkness under Onias's command, or allow Shadowgrim his freedom? It was a choice between horrors, and I found myself caught in the middle with no good options. Either way, innocent people would suffer. The only question was how many, and in what manner. The dragon gets what energy you've already collected, I said finally. But this stops now. No more raids, no more torture. Find another way. Lyra laughed. You are in no position to dictate terms. With a single word, I can have a dozen. A dozen won't be enough against me, and you know it. Lyra studied my face. And if I refuse? I let my hand drift toward a knife. Then we'll find out if that potion restored more than just your appearance. She smiled then, a cold expression that held no warmth. You would threaten me here, surrounded by enemies, with no escape route. I shrugged. I've been in worse situations. She turned to watch the arena where priests prepared the extraction machinery for the next victim. Very well. We will take no one else from Alchester, but neither will I surrender those we have already taken. Falling into the goblin's trap and ending up here sealed their fate. You mean the people in the dungeon, I said, already knowing that she did. But understand that if Shadowgrim cannot destroy the Malafang horn with the energy we've already gathered, the consequences will fall on all our heads. Better to take the risk than allow more people to fall victim to the Jackery's mad plans. I was no hero, but I wasn't a monster either. Everyone died, and we rarely got to choose the place or time. But that death should at least be a quick, clean one, with minimal suffering. I couldn't do anything about the ones who came before, or even those on the arena tables, or those still locked in the dungeon. But at least the Jackery would take no one else. Our conversation at an end, I said, I should go. Yes, you should, Lyra said, her tone carrying a hint of finality. Perhaps she meant it as a warning, or maybe that I'd overstayed my welcome. But remember what I told you, she said. Shadowgrim's freedom depends on destroying the horn before Onias can use it. If Onias subjugates the dragon, then we are all doomed. I had nothing else to say that wouldn't lead us back into the same circular argument, so I melted into the shadows of the royal chambers, retracing my path through the service tunnels. The return journey felt longer than the ascent, perhaps because I carried a burden of knowledge I wished I didn't possess, with every scream echoing through the amphitheater's passages, reminding me of the choice I'd made. Once through the maintenance entrance, I found Vorth and Skit right where I'd left them, though both looked considerably more nervous than when I departed. "About time," Skit hissed as I approached their hiding spot. "We were starting to think you'd been caught." "Or worse," Vorth added, his single eye darting toward the royal box. "Lord Rax stormed into the arena like he wanted to kill someone. Nearly took the head off one of the guards." "Did you learn what you needed?" Skit asked. "More than I wanted to," I said. "Let's get out of here." We made our way through the amphitheater's corridors, retracing the route that had brought us to this place of horrors. The guards at the checkpoints waved us through without incident, our forged papers still serving their purpose. Soon we traversed Grimlock's main thoroughfares, where the usual bustle of city life, even goblin city life, seemed almost cheerful after what I witnessed. "You look like someone walked over your grave," Vorth observed as we climbed the sunken road toward the market quarter. "Something like that," I said. The goblins led us deep into a quiet alley, which seemed the perfect time for us to settle up and go our separate ways. I was reaching for the coin pouch at my belt, ready to count out the sum owed, when Vorth slid a dagger free and said, "Might as well toss over the whole thing." Though the outcome of my visit to the amphitheater had rattled my thoughts, I had enough sense to recognize a double cross when I saw one. Given the gleam in Vorth's eye and the way Skit ran his forked tongue over his dried lips, I knew that handing over my money pouch wasn't enough to satisfy these two. Just like when Vorth had tried to shake me down in the tavern, this kind of move wasn't a complete surprise. Still, it would have been nice to have had one thing go my way on this night of all nights. "See, while you were off playing spy," Vorth said, "Skit and I got to talking. Realized we might have been thinking too small about this whole arrangement." "What do you mean?" I asked, my hands drifting to my weapons. "Well," Skit said with a grin that showed too many sharp teeth, "we figure Lord Rax will pay a lot more for a human spy than we're getting from you. A lot more." "So, here's our new terms," Vorth continued. "We'll take all your coins and your head, too. Nothing personal, you understand. Just business." That's when the surrounding shadows moved, and half a dozen goblins emerged from concealment, a mix of Haurecs and imps, thankfully none of the giant-like Gaugaths, all armed and moving with the eager gleam of gold in their eyes. When I spotted a Hauric guard from the arena amongst them, I knew how Vorth and Skit had coordinated this ambush. I drew my sword and knife. 2 opponents or 20, they were still my best bet. You should have stuck to the original deal. Coulda, shoulda. This would go so much easier if you'd put your weapons down, but I like our odds anyway. Take 'em, boys. These treacherous goblins had chosen the worst possible time to try their luck. The frustration and anger I suppressed since learning about the tortured souls, the impossible choice I had to make, and accepting, reluctantly, but still accepting. My complicity in the ongoing horror demanded an outlet, preferably a violent one. I hadn't realized it earlier, but this was exactly what I needed right now. Deceit, overwhelming odds, and opponents whom I didn't give a rat's arse about. I let it wash over me like a healing salve as I prepared to show these goblins just how big a mistake they had made by turning on me. The first goblin to reach me was an imp with a curved dagger, his white eyes gleaming with bloodlust. I sidestepped his clumsy lunge and carved him open with a backhanded slice that sprayed his blood across the stonework. A Haurec warrior came at me, swinging a wicked-looking mace with enough force to cave in a skull. I reached him first, my sword slicing through his crude armor and opening his chest. He roared in pain and staggered away, the mace falling from nerveless fingers. I spun between 2 more attackers, my blades weaving patterns of death. One goblin's sword arm fell to the stone, severed at the elbow, while his companion doubled over, clutching the ruins of his stomach. Skit darted in behind me, but I expected the move. When he leaped at me with both claws extended and his forked tongue flailing maniacally from between his lips, I spun and caught him in midair. Some say the mere presence of a Greckle spoils luck. But I never relied on luck, so using the skill I'd honed over years of training, my black blade sliced through his crude leather armor like parchment, opening him from ribs to spine. His yellow eyes were already glazing over when he hit the ground, his life pouring out onto the ancient stones. Such a display did not deter Vorth, who circled with the patience of an experienced fighter, his single eye studying my stance and weapon positioning. Unlike Skit's reckless charge, the Horik moved with the calculated aggression of someone who'd survived countless battles in Grimlock's violent hierarchy. He feinted left, then came in low from the right, his blade seeking the gap beneath my arm where my leather armor was thinnest. Against any other opponent, his tactic had a chance of working. Against me, it had no chance at all. I caught his blade on my long knife, turning the strike aside, then slashed my sword across his breastplate. The volcanic steel carved a crevasse through his armor and across his chest, the goblin's eyes widening as black blood escaped from the wound. Vorth sank to his knees, then he pitched forward to collapse beside his former partner. "Should have stuck to the deal," I said, wiping my blade clean on his cloak. The remaining goblins looked between their fallen comrades and me, their earlier confidence evaporating like morning mist. One, an imp with more sense than courage, turned and ran. His footsteps echoed down the alleyway as he fled. The others hesitated, caught between fear and the knowledge that running might mark them as cowards in a society that valued strength above all else. That hesitation cost them their lives. I moved through them like a plague, my blades killing with mechanical efficiency. There was no artistry in it, no satisfaction, only the efficient application of violence to solve a problem that shouldn't have existed in the first place. When it was over, 7 goblins lay on the cold ground, dead or dying. Approaching footsteps alerted me to curious bystanders, or city guards, coming to see what all the commotion was about. I stopped long enough to retrieve my coins from Vorth and Skit. Then I was away, melting into the deeper shadows and leaving the carnage behind as I made my way through Grimlock's winding streets toward the dungeon. I had to press myself into shadowed alcoves to avoid detection twice, but I reached the dungeon in short order, and since no one ever tried breaking into such a place, snuck inside with no one the wiser. The cell where I'd first appeared stood empty, its door still open. The portal's energy still shimmered faintly in the corner, invisible to casual observation but noticeable once you knew it was there. I positioned myself in the same spot where I'd appeared hours earlier and stepped through. The same disorienting sensation of existing nowhere and everywhere at once hit me again. Then I appeared in the Lendon's workshop, stumbling as reality reasserted itself around me. But the workshop wasn't as I'd left it. Raid and Kess were there, as expected, hunched over their instruments and monitoring equipment. But they weren't alone. Elizabeth stood near the central workbench, her dark leather outfit and weapons marking her as ready for action. Matilda, clad in a purple traveling cloak that matched the color of her hair, stood beside her. But Captain Geoffrey Belford's presence drove home the importance of what I had asked of them more than anything else. The mercenary captain wore his full kit and even carried a shield with the distinct company emblem, a black shield, emblazoned across the front. He had his helmet tucked under an arm, and he wore a bastard sword on one hip and a warhammer on the other. No doubt about it, he was prepared for all-out warfare. "I have my men positioned outside," he said without preamble. "Full kit, ready for urban assault. We can breach and clear the target location within minutes. Just say the word." Elizabeth noticed first. Of course she would. "What's wrong?" she asked, frowning. Everyone had turned to look at me, their expressions ranging from relief to anticipation to barely contained eagerness for action. I could only stare back at them. When I left to scout the portal's destination, I had every intention of mounting a rescue operation, but I knew I couldn't do it alone. While the Lendons busied themselves with the machine, I visited Guildhouse. Not to ask for anyone to follow me through the portal, that part came later, but to gather intel from Matilda, who had lived in Grimlock for a stint. While I questioned her, Liz had dropped in, figured out what was happening, and insisted on helping. Liz was like that, always looking out for others, especially me. "Fine," I'd said. Liz knew how to take care of herself, and her talents always proved helpful. Matilda hadn't volunteered then, but she was here now, probably out of some misplaced sense of loyalty I didn't deserve. And then there was Captain Belford, who at one time wanted me dead. "I want to hire you," I had told him as soon as he opened his door. Still bleary-eyed, he looked at me with some confusion, so I said the words again. "I heard you," he grumbled, annoyed. "What time is it?" "Late or early, depending on how you judge such things. May I come in?" Jeffrey swung the door wide. He'd thrown on a pair of trousers but wore no shirt, exposing a muscled chest crisscrossed with the marks of past battles. "I'd offer you something to drink, but you aren't staying long," Jeffrey said, going to the bedroom to fetch a robe. When he returned, he fell into a chair, and we got down to business. "Now, what's this about?" "So," I told him, sparing no detail. The goblins of Grimlock were snatching Alchester's citizens off the streets, and I needed the Black Guard's help to stop them. Once we got past the part where he thought I was joking, we discussed specifics. Based on the information Matilda had provided earlier, I told him what I knew about the city and how I intended to go through the portal first, alone, to assess the situation and look around. "So, you need the Black Guard for what?" he asked. "I expect considerable resistance, especially once Lord Rax finds out what we're doing there." "Better to get in and out without him knowing." "Of course, but that may prove difficult depending on how many prisoners we free." Jeffrey grunted. "Still, a small force would work best, 20 men at most. I have some of the best urban warfare mercs in the business. Finding 20 won't prove difficult. There is, however, the question of payment. My company doesn't work for free." "You wouldn't call yourselves mercenaries if you did. Don't worry, I can cover it. You'll have to take my word for it, though, since no banks are open right now." "Assassinations pay that well?" "You'd be surprised. But I've got some family money stashed away, too. More than enough to hire you and your men for one night of soldiering." I knew I needed professional mercenaries for what amounted to an assault on a goblin fortress, but that was before my conversation with Lyra, before I agreed to her terms. Back in the here and now, Elizabeth stopped before me and asked, "Well, how many prisoners are we looking at? What's the security situation?" I opened my mouth to answer, then closed it again. How could I explain that there would be no rescue? That I'd made a deal that saved future victims while abandoning those already trapped in the Jackery's operation? I didn't expect anyone here to understand or agree with the deal I made with Lyra. Like the warders, I needed the Jackery's plan to move forward. One way or another, the Dark One was getting free. That meant someone needed to stop Onias's plan to subjugate the dragon and bring about eternal darkness. Everyone in the city did. So I answered in the only way I could. "There's been a change of plans." "What kind of change?" Matilda asked, her green eyes narrowing. Always suspicious, that one. Though she didn't know it, she had good reason this time. "The kind where there's no one left to rescue," I said, the lie bitter on my tongue. The links of Captain Belford's mail clinked as he shifted position. What happened to them? For now, I ignored his question. "Some came through earlier?" I asked. Kess nodded. "We sent them on their way." Raid was less polite, gesturing at a small corpse covered by a blood-stained sheet. "We got the dead goblin, too." "The ones you sent through said there were others," Kess said. "In the dungeon and maybe elsewhere. One of the people who came through, Joran Silversong, he said his name was, told us he didn't know where the other prisoners ended up, but that guards took some away every day." "He told us the other cells were full," Raid said. "You're saying they're not?" "Joran Silversong and his merry band of fellow prisoners from the dungeon cell. Of course, he had his own story to tell about other prisoners needing rescue, though I noticed he hadn't stuck around to make sure any of them made it home." "There were prisoners when I got there," I said, "but guards cleared the dungeon out. They're gone. Dead. The goblins are working with the Jackery. I followed them, but there wasn't anything I could do." Elizabeth locked her eyes with mine. She knew me well enough to see through deception, but my advantage was that she trusted me. Plus, no one had any reason to doubt I was telling anything but the truth, so after a few moments of silent brooding, they accepted the lie. Everyone but Liz. She touched my arm and asked, "Are you all right? You seem off." Fine. Just been one of those nights. You're sure there's no one left to rescue? She asked, giving me one more opportunity. Yes, I'm sure. Liz hesitated, but even she finally accepted my answer with a slight nod. Raid shut down the machine, his disappointment shared by his sister, who slouched on her stool. Kess, help me pack this thing away. Might be we'll need it again someday. The task at least gave them something to do. So that's it then? Jeffrey asked. We're standing down? For now, I said, though the words felt like ash in my mouth. But keep your men on standby. I'll pay whatever it takes. This isn't over. Captain Belford mumbled something about not keeping his men standing in the cold any longer than necessary and excused himself. Matilda followed soon after. I left with Elizabeth, who took my arm as we stepped onto the frozen street. We hadn't made it a block when she asked a question that told me she didn't trust me as much as I thought. Want to tell me what really happened? I told you what happened. You told me a story, she said. There's a difference. I've known you long enough to recognize when you're lying. No point in denying it. Sometimes a lie is better than the truth. Doesn't that depend on who the lie benefits? I had no answer to that, so we walked to Liz's place in silence. At the door, I told her I'd catch up with her tomorrow. Another person you need to lie to? Liz asked, sounding harsher than I think she meant, because she sighed and, leaning closer, wrapped her arms around me. I welcomed her embrace with one of my own. Sorry, she said. When you're ready to tell me what happened, I know you will. The pre-dawn streets of Alchester were empty except for the occasional watchman making his rounds, his bobbing lantern casting shadows that danced across the snow-covered cobblestones, and snow shovelers, those dedicated individuals who fought a daily losing battle against the unrelenting tide of winter. Pulling my cloak tighter against the bitter cold, I kept my head down as I made my way toward the shambles. I was in that in-between time, when the drunks had stumbled home to pass out, but the folk who rose early, carters, stable hands, bread makers, hadn't quite risen to start their day. The air was still. Neighborhoods were quiet. Even my footfalls across the snow, which had become hard-packed and unyielding, made little noise. Only the memories of those I left behind to die made any sound at all. Please, sir, my children need me. From the graying mother. I remembered the hands reaching through bars. I have money, a shop owner had said. I can pay you. Take me with you. The desperate faces. My wife doesn't know where I am, a gentleman mewed. She'll think I abandoned her. The pleas to take them with me, or, from the Harik warrior, to at least open his cell door so he could die fighting. I'm all my mother has left, another had said. Please, she's sick and needs me. But of all the things they asked of me, one stuck with me the most. Don't leave us here to die. I, who deal in death on a near-daily basis, shivered, not from the cold, but because for the first time I left a string of bodies behind who weren't dead but soon would be. I'd condemned them, granting them neither mercy nor death but something in between. I tried to purge their faces from my mind. Every few blocks, the memories of what I'd left behind in Grimlock's dungeon surfaced unbidden. They didn't stop until I knocked on Mira's door. After some minutes, I heard shuffling footsteps approaching from inside. Who's there? I have news about Dex. A bolt slid back, then another. The door opened a slit, revealing Mira's bleary-eyed face. Her dark hair hung loose and uncombed, and she wore a simple shift beneath a heavy woolen robe pulled tight against the cold. You found him? She asked. Yes, I said, wanting to get this over with as quickly as possible. I found out what happened to him. He's gone. Gone? She asked, uncertain what I meant. So I clarified it in no uncertain terms. He's dead. The words hung between us like a physical thing. Mira's hand tightened on the doorframe, her knuckles turning white from the pressure. Did he... She started to ask, but the words stuck in her throat. Suffer? She nodded. Not at all, I said. He died quickly, painless. She nodded again, her gaze drifting from mine. Maybe, like Elizabeth, she knew I was lying. But Mira didn't know me like Liz did, so she wouldn't press for more. "Who?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I knew what she meant. Who did this to Dex? That's complicated. How much to tell her that would actually make sense? The people who took him were running an operation, kidnapping people from the streets, using them for something terrible. Dex got caught up in it. I paused, choosing my words carefully. I found the person responsible. Put a stop to the kidnappings. There won't be any more. Thank you, she said, tears beginning to track down her cheeks, for finding out what happened, for making them pay. I didn't trust myself to speak, so I said nothing. Mira closed the door softly. I heard the bolts sliding into place. I stood there in the narrow hallway, listening to the muffled sounds of her grief through the thin walls. Then I made my way back down the creaking stairs. Outside, the first hints of true dawn lightened the eastern sky, painting the snow-covered rooftops in shades of pale gold and rose. The city was stirring to life around me. Bakers lighting their ovens, shopkeepers opening their shutters, ordinary people beginning another ordinary day. They had no notion of the tortured souls harvested in Grimlock's depths, or the political machinations that had saved their lives at the cost of others. They would go about their business, complain about the weather, worry about their own small problems, blissfully unaware of the darkness festering beneath their feet. Perhaps that was for the best. The truth was too heavy for ordinary people to bear. The faces again, protruding into my thoughts, no matter the effort I exerted to push them away. Young, old, rich, poor, and one, marked by the tattoo of a crow's feather, slouching at the back of one cell. Purplish bruises marked his face, but there was no missing the distinct mark on his neck. As I passed, our gazes met. Dex didn't plead for release or offer anything to help him escape. He saw the look in my eyes and knew I wasn't here to help. Reflecting on it, I admired the economy of his inaction. Why waste the energy when he needed it for the trial ahead? Like the others, Mira will never know what I did. It's better she live with the lie I told her, rather than face the truth. Desiring solitude, I pulled my hood up and made my way through the awakening city, carrying the weight of choices made and prices paid. Behind me, in a crumbling tenement in the shambles, a young woman grieved for a friend who was never coming home. Ahead of me lay whatever consequences flowed from the deal I'd struck with a high priestess in a goblin fortress. The Unifying Convergence was rapidly approaching. Little time remained to prepare, plan, and steel myself for the role I intended to play in Shadowgrim's return to the world. But when the Convergence arrived, Claire Carter, Onias, Lyra, and Shadowgrim himself would discover I had plans of my own, plans that would save my city and permanently end their schemes. I disappeared into the maze of Alchester's streets, just another shadow in a city full of them, carrying secrets that could damn us or save us all. You've reached the end of this adventure. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel to get a notification when each new story is available. You can view all my books and get the latest news by visiting scottmarlowe.com.